Okay. So can we have a round of applause by way of welcoming Jean, please, before I hand over. Okay, actually what we normally do is we read a poem by way of welcome, and that's not usually recorded, but that is how it has turned out tonight. So this is a poem by another master of wildness, Gerard Manley Hopkins. It's called Inversnade. This darksome burn, horseback brown, is rock, high road roaring down. In crop and in coombe, the fleece of his foam flutes, and low to the lake falls home. The wind puff bonnet of fawn froth turns and dwindles over the broth of a pool so pitch black, fell browning, it rounds and rounds despair to drowning. Decked with dew, dappled with dew, are the groins of the braes that the brook treads through. Wiry heath packs, flitches of fern, and bead pony ash that sits over the burn. What would the world be once bereft of wet and of wildness? Let them be left, oh, let them be left, wildness and wet. Long live the weeds and the wilderness yet. And now, Jean, over to you.
Thank you, Jacques. Thank you for your welcome. Thank you all for having me and for coming to listen. Jacques, I don't know if you know, but Hopkins is one of the first poets that I ever really grappled with. And that particular poem is one of the few poems that I've learned off by heart in my life. So that was a particularly good choice to welcome me with. Well, and I'm sorry if I disappoint, but I've decided to read all new poems this time round. That means that if you would like me to read an old poem, I'll have to take a moment at the end and look it up on my phone, and I can maybe read them at the end. But so I've been in a bit of a new season lately. Can you hear me all right, by the way, before I carry on?
Yes, absolutely, and anything goes.
I am just at the beginning, or just before the beginning of lockdown, I gave birth to our son, Asher. And so I've been a little bit out of science and out of school and out of everything, really. We have a lockdown baby. He's 19 months old now, and he's taking up most of my time. So the poems I'll be reading are mostly quite recent poems. Whether they're good or not, we'll wait and see. They've been written in and around motherhood and sleeplessness and that sort of thing. But I thought I'd bring something recent anyway, because there's nothing like being a new parent to change your life completely. So, anything I could have read from the past would have probably not been where I am at the moment. So I'll just launch straight in. I also wanted to read some from the McGregor anthology, but I have left my book in a different part of the house, and I won't be able to go and fetch it now. So I'll have to leave those for you to go and read yourself. I think probably most people here struggle with it. Right, but here goes. I'd like to talk with you about why you are reading this poem. What longing or drive or idle moment, what self-respect or despair, what hope, and where you are and who, and about why I am hiding on this page from you. To me, you are always unanswering, naturally not personally concerned. Life has not let us be more than this to one another. Let's make the most of it. You imagine me, I will imagine you. I suppose you might be in a phase of life where you have time for reading. And since you are reading my poem, you must have a reason for reading little-known South African writers. Or perhaps you are related to me. Oh, scrap that romantic part about longings and drives. Perhaps I asked you to read it. Or perhaps you write too, and have read with a critical eye. Or perhaps you are kind. Well, I will write as though you are kind, and as though you are human, and sometimes have a day in which you feel poetical, and other times when you'd rather read something calming and light. Oh, read this then, tonight, or this morning, if you can stay awake. Read that I was wondering about you, and the more real you became, the more like someone I know, the less free I felt to attribute to you plunging wild emotion. I realized it was trespass, since I don't know you, nor know whether I want to elicit plunge exactly from you, or wildness. Then what? Well, perhaps look with me at my sleeping boy. These are all the conversations I have these days anyway. Look at him. Once I repeated cynical sayings about children, about many things. These days, I cannot afford not to rise on the curve of his cheek, to fall with his breath, to notice life here, to think of death, to check he is still breathing. I suppose I'm already someone other than the poet. I have something more, or something else anyway, something that keeps me from writing, or even from thinking of writing. But tonight, in the midst of living, I am thinking of you. I am thinking of you, and since it's not enough, or not specific enough to call you, oh, would you come and look with me at my sleeping boy? Here is the best gift I have now to give, and find here something like what I find lying down beside him. Notice his softness, his practicing separation, his wistful bye-bye, his helplessness in sleep, his stirrings, and be asked with me for help, as though help must be given, and be trusted with me for what you would never ask of anyone if you knew they were this tired, if you could get away with doing it on your own. And fill your mind's eye with his large eyes, laughing, as though you are the only and best friend, and know that you are also one such miracle. There. I suppose if this is any good, and any good for you, you have my best gift now on a tired evening. Thank you for being there to write to, and for taking time to imagine me, imagining you. By way of introduction, thank you for being there to talk to. Then we'll rewind a bit back to the beginning of 2020, house hunting, for a house we didn't end up buying, actually. Thank goodness, because of lockdown. But suburbia. I will go head first into the suburbs, sensible of shopping malls and kiddie gyms. I will go looking for sea views and gardens, knowing where I go there is no afro, and carry my concerns, poverty and corruption, and will live with as much beauty and purpose as can be found next door, because it is the time for me, and we will make our suppers where we can. And can I hope for more of a politic than immigration, more of a vote than where to spend? Mr. Ramaphosa's email. I am going to the shops in our old car, which is dirty and has leaves in the footwells, and thinking how our other car has started squealing, the clutch. And I am pregnant, so I have had to unbutton my pants. And I have a list in my pocket which says milk, bread, salad, cheese, box milk, etc., and is tied to our spreadsheet and our salaries and to ESCOM. Today, Mr. Ramaphosa sent everyone an email. I wanted to write back to say, thank you. I am pregnant and I stopped to think of everybody living with sand between their toes and gaps between the corrugated outside of their temporary permanent tin box in the September heat wave. I cannot feel good without the sight of the oak trees in Rondebosch and the mountain, I cannot find time to get to the sea. I don't know how we can live otherwise, any of us, and nothing will improve if you let them keep on taking it home, thinking it is all shacks anyway, except for my garden, my car. I say no to the big issue man who looks thinner. I drive over the shattered bumper of a blue car stopped in the intersection and catch a glimpse of a large woman and children, water on the tar. I unpack the groceries. They are heavy and I am pregnant. Our kitchen floor and our dreams are under construction. Mr. Ramaphosa, it was good of you to think of me. I Googled to see if I could add my address to your list. I could not, but the newspapers, the NHI, the dams, the sea levels, Greta Thunberg, we do not know what to hope for anymore. In March, our baby is due, and we will still be here, and so will you. Stay-at-home worries. Car, tar, tackies, legs, path, breeze, trees, bicycle, mountain, distance, road, indoors, yours. He is sleeping now, a man somewhere in the world, subject to dreams, to love, to age, to supermarkets, air travel, traffic, emotionally unstable associates, email scans, exchange rates, customs regulations. He is a man who speaks a language, who eats and dresses. He knows to the extent that any of us does the cost of his life. Perhaps he has seen the charts, perhaps not. He might be a policymaker or a removals man. Perhaps he is a woman. At some point, the teacher will have expected too little of him. At some point, he will have laughed at a joke at someone else's expense. Perhaps his wealth is in a house or a bank or abroad, or perhaps he has none. He will wake and will slowly become aware or almost aware, responsible or almost responsible for his actions. And this man is the one who will write something or say something or build something or serve someone something or do something angry or kind or well thought out. Or perhaps he will die young in an avalanche or a flood, or he will be caught on camera fighting for food. And he is the one who will tip the balance. Perhaps he will be too late. There will be a meeting somewhere, perhaps amid riots or war, perhaps peacefully before a dinner function. Documents will be signed, or perhaps resolutions will be enforced, or perhaps at last a means will be realized, perhaps before too many have died, and the world will begin slowly to cool. I have to say that's probably the most direct result of teaching high school life sciences. Talking to teenagers seriously about global warming is quite a sort of soul-searching activity. Back to being pregnant. the only pregnant woman in the world, the only egg, the only one, growing large and uncomfortable, shiny, global, the only one moving with child only waiting to be the one laboring, the only woman bearing down, singular, the one fruit like a fantasy tree, growing alone on a cartoon hill, containing in its branches one nut for life or love or fortune, this tree quietly becoming a history. When I read poetry, I cry. All poetry, but especially poems about death, though almost all are about loss or love or longing, life and relief. In me, the baby moves, larger every day, more like a lie, it and I, awash in our fluids, our processes, beginning all the time and ending, enlarging with the minutes and diminishing, remembering only in reverse, only remembering in reverse, and forgetting, getting only forwards, going on. I always cry when reading poetry. Poetry during lockdown, May 2020. There's not much here to mention, but our sofa is quite good, apart from the flattened side and crumbs. There isn't much to say, except caged birds have 1/100th of the room and are recently mainly ignored because of baby. I don't have much to write about, apart from the feeling of having a bougainvillea and the smell of the neighbor's fireplace and treetops with bird song, sunshine, and most of the mountain over rooftops with small clouds, and 6 rooms our own with levees, and listening to the few cars on the freeway and knowing that we will not always be so enclosed from consequence, wondering how the lid will come off. Though today it doesn't matter, middle class poetry during lockdown. Then, like I said, I'm going to skip out the poems from the McGregor anthology, unfortunately, because I didn't bring it with me. But perhaps if there's a moment, I can run and fetch it later. I was thinking, having given birth, thinking about the metaphor in the Bible about the end of the world, and that it will be, or that it likens the end of the world to birth pains, or the trials toward the end of the world to birth pains. And for the first time, I know what that is, what that really means. So I've written a few about this, but this one, like birth pains, means everything is torn, transformed irresistibly in a trauma in which we are a part and are taken apart and must endure and must let go in an hour of everything familiar, the most carefully guarded corners of the body, the private moments of the mind, with no knowledge yet of anything but the materials of this moment. Let's talk about my baby, because I'm a mom, this is what we do. Let's talk about my baby. All the people who once left comments are over it now. Can you, any of you, but you can't, of course, tell me what crook of his colon, what crease of his elbow, flick of his eye, carries us over 5 a.m. I have noticed how large he is, like the memories of childhood in my arm. His enormous expressions, his new eyes, doesn't carry over onto my phone. I don't want to WhatsApp while his sleeping bundle is still gory on my abdomen, a memento of pain. Think about the South Bank, how very lonely, baklava and buildings, when we are tangled in pillows, decisions about sleep and nappies, strands of yellow poo, the tape modern, incomprehensible, dark and high as the night. It's useless to recommend going hiking while you still can. Can you see how close and sticky things are? He's woken again. My husband has no mammary glands, and there's no answer but the scent of his scalp, the pearl of his lip. 6 weeks in before I saw that this is love that I carry here on my chest. Unformed, uninformed, that is what this is. Love before everything. Watching snails. This I wrote for this year's McGregor Festival, as you'll probably recognize from the first line. In the garden of the beloved, watching snails, wakened from sleep on an overturned stone, slowly opening and stretching away, tentacling at the enormous unknowable, holding back my little boy's hand, telling him they can break, delaying saying they will die. He watches, touches, wants the snails, says, nail, nail, all afternoon, and tomorrow again. Holds his face close to mine, holds my hand, sleeps pressed against me, wakes to make sure I'm still there. The next poem is one that I read the last time I was able to make it to a Red Wheelbarrow open mic session. And I sort of wrote it in the interest of trying to be honest about some of the awkwardness that we experience in this country sometimes. But having read it, I had some second thoughts. So I've written a little follow-up poem And I want to read the original poem first, and then I'll read the follow-up as well. First poem is Being White in Public. Like looking over the fence at Odemolen for chickens to show my little boy that they exist outside of his board books, while Granny is paying for our drinks, and finding 3 women in traditional inspired dress waiting at a photo shoot. And one is friendly because of the baby, so they turn, and I ask about the shoot. But they say they are musicians, and while I'm wondering if they are a well-known band, they all turn away, and I think maybe they are. Or maybe it's not cool to be too friendly with the oppressor. Perhaps I offended them by trying too hard. Anyway, the friendly one kept being friendly when Granny arrived, and we went back to change nappies in the car. Remembering my grandmother's chickens and the little boy bandy-legged with rickets, and feeling grateful and ashamed all the way back down Coburg Road, and wondering whether it really is a difficult time for them to be making music. Perhaps the government is on their side. Then here's a follow-up. Reading a poem about being white in public, and judging myself. Imagining hearing me. I am basically another South African who can't get over race, can't get difference out of my head, can't just ever see another person and simply be. With apologies for the first one, and I realized afterwards there was quite a lot of othering going on, well, one does tend to overthink things sometimes, I think, but I thought I'd share. The next couple of poems are from my blog, and if you like, I can share the address to that later. I must say I haven't had a chance to write much on it in the last couple of months, but in the interest of trying to be a bit more in touch with particularly South African poetry, I started a blog in which I try to find a South African poem that's available online somewhere, and then read it and write my own response. Link it, write a response, and you'll see if you have a look at my blog, there's an invitation if anyone wants to also respond in the comments on the blog. No one has responded yet, so you're welcome to be the first if you'd like to. But in the meantime, I'm having fun. So I thought I'd share just 2. I'll read the poem, if I may. How am I doing for time?
Okay.
You're doing well.
8 minutes past.
8 minutes past 8. Okay. So perhaps I'll read, or what time would you like me to be finished by?
Okay.
About 22, quarter to.
Oh, fine. Okay, I'll be done. I'll definitely be done by. Thanks. All right. So I'm going to read the original, and then I'll read my tentative response. The first one is actually featured on the Red Wheelbarrow website. So it's a poem that was read by CJ Driver at his Red Wheelbarrow reading in, I think it was May this year. So I'll read his poem, and then I've just written something that's kind of inspired by or sparked by that poem of my own. So the poem is In the Water Margins by CJ Driver. Here at the water's edge, in a cabin on stilts, I'm listening to what the reeds are telling me in a kind of breathless whispering, as if, so indefinite that the words are like swallows flittering low, but too fast to be caught by anyone or anything, except as streaks on the edge of one's retina, like smears of ink on a faded Chinese manuscript. And then, in your most matter-of-fact voice, you say, it's just the noise of the wind in the reeds and the water moving when the reeds are shuffled backwards and forwards. So you scoff at me like a postmodernist philosopher. Do you really think you can hear what the reeds say? You may as well try to catch the swallows as they curve down to the meniscus of the water and then upwards. The water margins are where troublemakers were sent by the emperor and his mandarins when they'd had enough of their insidious garrulity, inconstancy, duplicity, Even here at home, even in what was once my own country, the soul gets sent away, out of all imagining. What the reeds are saying as the wind passes between them are aspirant conditionals, as if only, and provided, as if everything, that's what the reed bird is saying, which isn't much different from as if nothing, when nothing and victory may be synonymous. It's no good you're telling me it should be otherwise. If you can't hear what I hear when the reeds gossip to me, it's because you seem to know precisely that this is personal. You suppose the noise is sans significance, the words without meaning. Even when you think there is nothing that matters, something does. And that turns out to be the biggest puzzle, that there should be something at all and not just nothing. This is what I'm having such trouble with when I hear that persistent chorus. I feared those voices would be baleful. Instead, they are kind of peaceful, kind of accepting, maybe even kind of kindly here in the water margins. So I just love the kind of atmosphere and the depth of that poem. And I, of course, in the midst of looking after a child, I've come up with my own response, which is probably not quite as deep, but here we go. Sounds in the shower. Sounds in the shower. Water falling inside four walls, constructs in the corners, noises shaped somehow by thought or by the Wi-Fi, full of news. First and always, the stainless steel drain ricochets the cries of my baby waking and calling for me. Though I know from experience he is still sleeping, and I should know by now the sound is too soft, a dream of crying, that could also be the shouts of rioters or weeping, the electronic sounds of a hospital ward, feet, conversations outside the door, a woman in labor far away, the sea, the man who sleeps in the subway and shouts in the street, the gate opening though nobody is expected, a door opened without a key, rats in the ceiling, mosquitoes in the dark. I have the tap set just right and I stay, turning to keep warm, practiced at ignoring. And then the next one is a poem by Kiora Petse Kositsile, a former poet laureate of South Africa, who I actually had the pleasure of meeting once very briefly. And this is his poem, Anguish Longer Than Sorrow. If destroying all the maps known would erase all the boundaries from the face of this earth, I would say, let us make a bonfire to reclaim and sing the human person. Refugee is an ominous load even for a child to carry. For some children, words like home could not carry any possible meaning, but displaced, border, refugee must carry dimensions of brutality and terror past the most hideous nightmare anyone could experience or imagine. Empty their young eyes, deprived of a vision of any future that they should have been entitled to, since they did not choose to be born where and when they were. Empty their young bellies, extended and rounded by malnutrition, and growling like the well-fed dogs of some with pretensions to concerns about human rights violations. Can you see them now stumble from nowhere to nowhere, between nothing and nothing? Consider the premature daily death of their young dreams. What staggering memories frighten and abort the hope that should have been an indelible inscription in their young eyes. Perhaps I should just borrow the rememberer's voice again while I can and say, to have a home is not a favor. And this one then by me in response. Refugee. There are foghorns in the bay. This morning, my boy and I waved hello to the man waking under plastic on the pavement. The one refugee I have known has a wife now on Facebook, married just as late as me, and a different name too, and I wonder how he has climbed slowly out of his hope that people like I was will allow him full membership, will know how to hear about genocide in the living room, in the house next door, or any talk of frailty, even given only as a newsreel, will begin to be strong enough to meet the heart that has survived, will match the enormous hope that still looks for what parents give, for good governments, and finds and forgives again shallow temporary invitations, the usual small concerns. Okay, and the last one then, perhaps hope. But this is just my own, not from the blog. I'm writing this in the evening of a day when I didn't go out to see the sun setting. It rose behind blinds while baby and I rubbed our eyes and made us squint at midday looking for the helicopter. After sunset, the clouds, each one itself giving its own little display, though the horizon had already risen and we could see the moon. Baby points and says, "Moon," reminded me of the Earth's turning, one planet, and gravity, space-time, incomprehensible distance. Baby is out of the bath now, saying poem on the landing in his father's arms. There is so much to keep doing here, meals, laundry, learning the names of things. Perhaps it is hope that one sees in the morning in the clouds. Thank you very much. That's all from me for now.
Okay.
Have a hand for Jean, please.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that stunning reading, Jean.
Thanks. And thanks everybody for being here.
Are there any questions? We usually have a short time for questions before we break. Are you okay to answer questions? And
Yes, yeah, I can do my best.
So what I probably am short of is a pair of eyes to tell me who has a raised hand with a question. But what I'll start us off, and then I think people then pandemonium can break loose for a few minutes.
Can I quickly interject, Jacques? So
Yes.
I will do the hosting for this section and I will introduce people when they put up their hands.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
And also if people want to be in the mic section, I can assist. So there's a hand from Jacques. Okay.
So I wondered if you wanted to say something about this something else, something more that poetry calls us to. So there's poetry, but there's this something else, which is maybe life itself. It has something to do with wonderment. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say about that.
I must say I'd have to think about it, to put it in any other than the most prosaic terms, but I think at the time I was thinking mostly about the fact that I've had a baby quite late in life. I think I'm 40 now. Yeah, I used to 40 or 41, somewhere around there. And I had my whole adult life up till recently. I had my head to myself, and one can think about the world and poetry. And since the birth of my baby, I really have realized how totally absorbed one is in the daily tasks and in this little person. And I suppose but to go a step beyond just the busyness of it all and the absorbingness, I think what I mean is it's also it is life. You know, something that when one writes about, or at least when I've written in the past, when it's trying to grasp after something like the substance of these close relationships, you know, where one feels one's really living and exchanging one's life with someone, you know, which is much more immediate than poetry. But also a different, you know, poetry is in some senses higher and in some senses not higher. I'm not sure. Yeah. Does that answer the question? I hope so.
Yes, no, thank you. That's lovely.
Any further questions?
Are you reading?
And I gotta quickly go and find some. I fell asleep last night on the couch.
My tummy's been so sore and it's chopped.
Any further questions?
Hi, Mignon. My hand is up. I don't know.
Oh, sorry, Ed. I was looking at, I was prioritizing people with faces. Go ahead.
No problem. As a faceless person here, I've got a very poor connection this evening, so I've missed some of the reading, Jean, unfortunately. But I just firstly thank you for coming tonight and sharing new work. I did get some of it at least, and I'm glad that you've remained open to just being where you are, I guess, in your life. And my question, sorry, was the blog. Do you have any plans for it, or are you just hoping that it will evolve organically with these conversations between poems?
Thanks, Ed.
Yeah.
I started it mainly as a way for me to kind of grapple a bit more with local poetry. Although it would be great if other people wanted to interact around the same topic. As far as plans at the moment, I'm realizing that I have less and less time for doing such things. So I'm going to try and keep it ticking over for the moment. Yeah, probably the most I'll manage to do in the next while is post occasionally. But you know, maybe in the future, if I start to find I have a bit more free time, then I'll
Okay.
try and make something more of it. At the moment, it's a motherhood project.
Understandable. I do think it's a fascinating project. Could go in all sorts of directions, and hopefully more people will contribute.
Thanks, Ed. I'll what I might do is send the blog address to you guys, and you can send it out with the recording or something that people can.
That's great. Yeah.
People don't have it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ed.
Hello, Jean. Thank you so much. This is Barbara, sort of next to Jacques.
Yes.
Mine is not so much a question, it's a moment of solidarity with you, because only someone who hasn't had a small baby in the house would ask a question about poetry right now. I went through the 60s having 6 children, and I didn't even know what people were talking about when they said the Beatles. Anyway, thank you very much, and go well with the baby.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for your, I could see your solidarity there next to Jacques as I was reading.
Can I slip in a question about working so closely with poetry and science? So I'm doing another inappropriate question about poetry, but there's something that's so exciting that happens at the intersection between those two disciplines, and you don't usually think of them as working side by side like they do in your work. How did that happen, or what would you like to say about that, about the way they nurture each other?
Do you know, for a long time, I sort of felt like a frustrated poet stuck in a lab. You know, I didn't really find the intersection between the two, except as a means to express my frustration. You know, one of the things about the science environment is it does its best to get rid of the personal and the sort of subjective, emotional aspects of things. So for a long time for me, poetry was a way to continue to explore those. And I would, yeah, when I was working in an environment where that wasn't welcome or, you know, encouraged. But I think one thing that sparked me to think about it a bit differently was reading, I have an anthology of every poem Robert Frost ever wrote. And he was one for really exploring the poetry of everyday and scientific things. So I found him quite inspiring in the way that he would write poetically about, you know, the universe or farming. And people know Robert Frost. So, and when I was reading so much of his work, I started trying to kind of draw out of my science suitable things, you know, things that come into the world of poetry. The other thing is that, you know, if you really think about science, it certainly sparks wonder and amazement. And it, in some ways, as much as poetry does, it treads the line between the real and the imaginary, you know, because it's a way of people trying to construct the universe based on, you know, experimental things. And sometimes in the lab, we get so used to the things that we know or that have been demonstrated that one stops being amazed by them. But and so I think my time teaching particularly really got me in touch again with the wonder and the weirdness of some of that. So I find poetry there in just the weirdness of what we actually know to be there. It's much stranger than it seems if you forget how long we've had to get used to it.
Any further questions?
I think then it looks as if we're going to have a 5-minute break. And if you would like to read in the open mic section after the break, we'll call you to read.